tell us the truth, Avi. Are these drones really small alien spacecraft that are surveying us and checking out what we're doing in preparation for something that we don't know about? And the alien mothership is parked on the dark side of the moon waiting for some event? Is that what's happening? Hi, thanks for joining us again for episode number 85 of the Doctor Podcast Show. And I'm your host, Dr. Robert Seichert. Please always subscribe and follow Doctor Podcasts and also like and repost this episode, which I'm sure you will love. So what's the hottest topic in the news today? Well, it's not the economy, it's not inflation, it's not the inauguration of President Trump, and it's not even bird flu. It's drones in the news every day. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody has different opinions. But today we're going to get the most important opinion from our guest today, Professor Avi Loeb, who is the professor of science at Harvard University. He's also the director of the Institute for Theory and Computation at Harvard. And he's published over 1,000 articles on astrophysics and astronomy. So he's an expert on this subject. He was also the chairman of the Department of Astronomy at Harvard for over 9 years, and he's the best-selling author of many books, including the most recent Extraterrestrial and Interstellar. So, Avi, thanks for taking time from your busy day to join us today to talk about drones and some other related topics. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. And I assume that if we knew for sure that there are drones, you wouldn't be that interested in them.
Well, I think there are, but there's some questions about them. So tell us the truth, Avi. Are these drones really small alien spacecraft that are surveying us and checking out what we're doing in preparation for something that we don't know about? And the alien mothership is parked on the dark side of the moon waiting for some event? Is that what's happening?
No, based on all the information we have, and we don't have a lot because we haven't seen detailed footage. And, for example, I'm quite confident that the US government has photography from satellites. They have the ability to resolve objects even on a scale of a fraction of a meter. So potentially they scanned those images of New Jersey in recent weeks to see what is out there. And they might know much more than I do. But based on the publicly available information from eyewitnesses, these appear to follow the flight characteristics of drones, human-made drones. And we all know that there are other adversarial nations developing this technology, in particular China. And based on all the reports, there are two possibilities. Either some of these objects may belong to an adversarial nation, in which case it's a serious matter of national security. And in that case, the reason the government is not saying much is because they don't want to alarm the public. We all know that the Chinese spy balloon that was spotted in January 2023 was indeed doing espionage, and it took a while for the US government to get engaged with that balloon. At first, it was civilians who reported about it. And that balloon was 45 meters in size. You could easily see it from the ground, see it from satellites, yet it took a while for the US government to respond to that. And as a result of that, the detection sensors of, radar systems in collaboration with Canada were improved, but it shows the vulnerability of the US to things in the sky, especially drones that are much smaller and difficult to detect. And of course, the US government will be reluctant to admit that vulnerability. It could also make the public anxious. And we know that drones were used in Ukraine. They are used all the time, even in peaceful times, to conduct missions. And it's just not clear whether some of the drones that were spotted belong to adversarial nations. So that's one possibility. Another is, of course, these are American and either launched by civilians or some organizations. And in that case, the US government knows the senders because they are not worried about it. They keep saying that there is nothing to worry about this, and but they don't actually tell us what they know. So that is with respect to recent weeks, but there were reports about drones and other objects for years now, including from military pilots like Ryan Graves, for example. And the question is whether we are witnessing a recurring phenomena that is not unique to this particular month. And in that case, we need to get to the bottom of it. If the US government does not really know precisely what it's all about, there needs to be more research into it. And that can be done either by the US intelligence agencies or by scientists. Because these are human-made, according to all the reports, I am not that interested in those objects. Unless they will show flight characteristics or other properties that deviate or exceed the technologies that we possess, in which case they could be extraterrestrial in origin. And as you well know, I'm leading the Galileo project, and the project was announced 1 month after the first report from the Director of National Intelligence to the US Congress that there are unidentified anomalous phenomena in the sky. And I actually asked Avril Haines in the green room of the Washington National Cathedral a few months later, what is your gut feeling? Because she was trained as a physicist. She had a bachelor's degree in physics from the University of Chicago. And she said, I don't know. And I believe her. It's quite possible that the government doesn't really know, but that means that they are admitting a potential vulnerability of the US. And so we need to get to the bottom of it. And the Galileo project in particular is mainly focused on the possibility that some objects might arrive to Earth from another civilization. And there is an observatory that was built at Harvard University over the past few years that is now operating. We get about 100,000 objects per month. So we cast this fishing net and we catch about 100,000 fish from the sky every month. And within a month from now, we'll start operating a system that will have multiple units a few miles apart so that we can triangulate and figure out the distances of objects so that we can figure out their actual velocity and actual acceleration. Otherwise, you don't know how fast they're moving if you don't know how far they are. And
Right.
then we are building in the process of constructing 2 additional observatories. The first one is at Harvard University in Massachusetts. The second would be in Pennsylvania, and the third one in Nevada. And each of these will do monitoring of the sky. Altogether, by summer 2025, we could get a few million objects per year documented and then analyzing them with machine learning software. And frankly, I'm just curious whether any of them may have arrived at Earth from another civilization. Maybe it represents technologies that we do not possess. Anything that is human-made is not of great interest to me as a scientist. Of course, it is of great interest to the US government.
Right. So sounds to me like you're 99% sure that these are not alien drones, but not
Well,
100%.
Well, the latest ones that were talked about, but if you go back
Right.
decades, there are, of course, reports about objects that behave in ways that do not represent the technologies we had at the
Right.
time. And
But
these reports both were mentioned in the documents from the Director of National Intelligence. There were 3 of those documents, and then there was the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office that looked into those reports. But there were also these reports date even before the past few years. And the question is whether there is something and whether the US government perhaps retrieved some materials from crash sites as mentioned in congressional hearings on this subject.
Right. Now, there have been some observers in the last few weeks who claim that the drone stopped suddenly and then reversed direction almost immediately, which would not sound like something that was man-made. It sounds like it's something from somewhere else. Do you believe those observations?
Well, there is no data that I can look at, and it's
Need data.
difficult to know what the person was seeing because, when a drone is doing maneuvers, it may look to you on the sky that it doesn't move sideways, but it actually moves away from you or towards you at the same time. So you can
Right.
get these optical illusions. And moreover, the Chinese developed the drone technologies. They have these swarms that are quite sophisticated. So as long as the velocity of the object and its acceleration are within the capabilities of current engines of drones, I wouldn't exclude that as being human-made.
Right. The other things that puzzle me is yesterday, President Biden said, "Don't worry about it. It's nothing to worry about. There's no security issue." He basically is saying, "Don't look up." It reminds me of that movie from a couple of years ago with the meteor approaching Earth. On the other hand, President Trump, a couple of days before that, says the government knows what these are, and they're just not telling us, and maybe we should shoot them down. Now, Trump saying that maybe we should shoot them down implies that they're not USA made, that they're some sort of foreign made rocket or drone. Uh,
Right.
is that what you're thinking from what you've heard from them?
Yeah, I mean, I will not be surprised if the drones are not as innocent as the current White House describes them. And the good news is that on January 20th, Trump will become the president. And at that point, perhaps we will hear more about these objects and about countermeasures if they belong to adversarial nations. Of course, if there's something else, we would like to know what they are. And I hope that the government knows because they're
Right.
not telling us.
Right. There's also been a senator yesterday said he thinks it's from China. A week before that, a congressman said it's Iranian drones from a mothership somewhere out in the ocean. So we're not getting a clear picture, and clearly the government's not even telling the Senate and Congress what's going on.
Yeah.
Maybe it's Trudeau from Canada sending these drones because he's angry at Trump for calling Canada the 51st state and making him the governor.
Well, it's one should keep in mind that drones can be purchased or brought into the United States by people that will fly them. So you don't need them to originate in the country that is sending them in some sense, that is trying to gather information on the US. And that could be an act that was initiated elsewhere, but is done from within the US. So it doesn't need to come from some ship in the ocean. And we just need to get to the bottom of it. And
Right.
why are these drones moving around? Now, it's probably a mixed bag in the sense that there are uh, things in the sky that belong to Americans, that belong to organizations that we know about, but we need to separate those from anything else. And I think the entire subject of UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomena, needs to be looked into in much more care within the intelligence agencies. If they know what it is, and it's not a matter of national security, as the White House is saying, why not reveal where it's coming from?
Right. Seems like that would be the course. Or maybe there was original some testing by our military, and China said, this is a good opportunity to send a few hundred more drones and just kind of confuse the public.
Well, one thing to keep in mind is they are probably monitoring the situation in China and in Russia. And now that this is up for discussion, they realize what they might be able to, even if they didn't use these particular drones, they are trying to figure out what they can use so that the US will not be able to protect itself from it.
Right.
So I think it opens a new way of making the U.S. vulnerable, and we need to counteract that by figuring out how to monitor the sky in ways that are far more effective, especially over strategic sites.
Right.
And obviously, there are reports about UAPs. There shouldn't be any reports about UAP. We should be able to know what these things are if we use
Right.
sufficiently sophisticated technologies. And, given that we invest 800 billion or 900 billion a year in military budgets, just allocating a small fraction of it to the technologies necessary to protect our nation against any national security risk would be of great importance. And by the way, if those sensors that are used to protect the sky would notice something that looks beyond human-made technologies, that would be the biggest. Whoever developed this technology will get the Nobel Prize. So the government can get the Nobel Prize if they protect American citizens.
Right. I was always under the impression that NORAD keeps track of every flying object
Oh,
in North
no.
America and nearby, but
Well, it really depends on the size of the object and the distance. And we know from the Chinese spy balloon that that wasn't the case. There were a few other objects. And only when the government was alerted, they started noticing those. And we know that it happened before. And of course, there are the reports from pilots about much smaller objects that are more difficult
right.
to detect with a conventional radar system.
Right. You mentioned the Galileo project, which you're the head of. How's that going with searching for the interstellar meteor 1 and interstellar meteor 2? And I know you've started a foundation to get funding to do another project there to dig up larger pieces of interstellar meteor 1. How's that going?
Right. So we went in June 2023 to the crash site of the first interstellar meteor that was spotted by US government satellites. And based on the location of the fireball, we went there and used the magnetic sled to collect tiny molten fragments from that meteor. And we found tens of them that have a chemical composition different from solar system materials. And we summarized it in a scientific paper. But all of those fragments or spherules or molten droplets, meteoritic material, was melted during the fireball, the explosion, and had a size less than the size of a grain of sand. So it could only inform us of elements that are not volatile, that did not evaporate during the explosion. And also, because they were molten, we cannot tell what the original structure of the object was, what was its nature. Just think about the Tesla Roadster car that was launched in 2018 by Elon Musk as a dummy payload to the Falcon Heavy. If it were to collide with Earth, let's say in 20 million years, which is quite possible based on detailed calculations, because now it orbits the sun, and then it will appear as an unusual meteor. And obviously, it will create a fireball and there will be molten droplets. And from analyzing them, you could infer the chemical composition, perhaps, of the non-volatile elements that made up the Tesla Roadster car. But you wouldn't be able to say that it's an artificial object rather than a rock of a type that we've never seen before. And in order to do that, you need to go to the crash site and look for bigger fragments that maintain their integrity and were not completely evaporated during the explosion. So that's what we are hoping to do in the next expedition. And we have a ship that is designated that has a robot, a remotely operated vehicle that we can put on the ocean floor and with a video feed monitor what it's picking up. And it could be bigger pieces. And that's what we hope to do. The mission will cost $6.5 million, and we are looking for a funder. And the one thing we know about this meteor is that it exploded low in the atmosphere. So it had material strength that is higher than all other meteors in the NASA catalog, hundreds of them. And it would be nice to figure out the composition of this meteor, because maybe it will teach us about how to make materials that are much tougher than the ones we currently use.
Right. So this might be material that Elon Musk could use on his Starship for the heat shield, because he mentioned in a post a few weeks ago that the biggest challenge that he's facing is to get heat shields for the Starship. So
Definitely.
maybe, right, maybe he could use this material that you found to create the heat shield.
Yeah, even if the origin of this meteor is a natural origin, there is still the remaining question: why? How did it maintain its integrity
Right.
to such a high stress? And that, and studying the bigger fragments can teach us that. Of course, if it happens that this meteor was a Tesla Roadster car that came from another star, well, first of all, there is competition to Elon. And secondly, it would be nice to figure out what the equivalent of Elon. I mean, we are all proud of Elon here on Earth, but the question is, what is an extraterrestrial Elon Musk capable of doing? And perhaps it will inspire us to do even better. So the second possibility, although more remote, is very exciting if it happens to be the case. Now, I should say, on this expedition, I had a filming crew that came with me from Netflix. And the Netflix documentary is supposed to come out within a year. But it was really amusing for me to, a few days ago, to get an email from a person that said, from abroad, from some another country, saying, I just watched a preview of your documentary and keep doing the work that you're doing. It's very inspirational, and don't pay attention to critics. And I said, no, you must have a mistake, because in fact, the documentary was not released. And that person showed me a photograph of me on the ship and said that this is day 4 on Silver Star. And I'm actually a member of a club that is reviewing previews for documentaries for Netflix. And so that was interesting, because the person went through a lot of effort to just stop in the middle, tell me, and look for my email address and tell me how excited they are. And so I think the public might find it exciting once the
Yeah.
documentary comes out. I should also say the public is extremely excited about this entire research program of the Galileo project, because, just a few weeks ago, I gave a lecture at a conference in San Francisco. And as I finished my lecture, I wanted to go to the men's rooms. On the way, I couldn't proceed more than a few feet without being stopped by a person who asked me for a selfie. And then I got to the I got to the men's room, and I enter, and someone was washing his hands and saying, "Are you Avi Loeb?" And I said, "Yes, that's me." And he said, "Well, I can't believe it. It feels just like standing next to Taylor Swift." Now, I mean, when I ask my daughters, they say that it's a compliment, but I'm not sure.
Wow. Once that Netflix special comes out, you're not going to be able to go to men's rooms anymore.
Yeah, well, I don't have any footprint on social media, because I don't care how many likes I get. I'm just trying to do what sounds like common sense. And I hope that next year will be exciting, 2025. And that's for a few reasons. One, we will have 3 observatories of the Galileo project collecting data on unidentified objects in the sky and with distances. And this is scientific quality data, never done before. And I mean, there was never an observatory of this nature, because astronomers focus on a small portion of the sky at any given time. But we built an observatory that looks at the entire sky all the time, and we will put it in 3 locations. The second reason to be excited about 2025 is there will be the Rubin Observatory, funded by the National Science Foundation, that will start operations with a 3.2 gigapixel camera that could find an interstellar object the size of a football field, like Oumuamua from 2017, every few months. And it would be exciting to figure out whether among the rocks that enter the solar system, there might be some technological debris. And I should mention that just last week, there was a scientific paper published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that details or lists 14 objects within the solar system that they call dark comets. And by that, they mean these are objects that are being propelled a little bit, but they have non-gravitational acceleration on top of the gravity that the sun exerts on them. So they show some internal propulsion, but there is no sign for a coma, a cometary tail around them. So they call them dark comets. And I say that is an oxymoron, because a comet is identified by the coma around it. So it's sort of like saying that all animals are, except for zebras, are unstriped zebras, because they don't have stripes, and they might be zebras. And so the point is that just like an elephant has no stripes but is not a zebra, you could imagine technological debris that maybe has some residues of an engine operating, or some fuel that is still evaporating and pushing it without us being able to see it, in the form of dust or carbon-based molecules, in the way comets evaporate. And so you would call it a dark comet, but it's actually an anomalous object that shows non-gravitational acceleration. And it really shows how science is done, how much bias there is, because experts are familiar with comets. So if they see something moving like a comet, but not showing the signatures of comets, like a cometary tail, they have a cognitive dissonance, meaning it doesn't line up with their narrative. So they would call it a comet, but say that it's a dark comet. And that would bring them peace of mind. They would not feel as if they're dealing with an anomaly. But I say, if there are anomalies, the more data we get on them, the clearer it will become that these are not comets, because we will eventually figure out, if we get an image of one of them, if they are technological in origin, we'll see screws on them, or they will not look like a piece of rock. So eventually we should figure it out, and it's just a matter of time. So let the experts call them dark comets for now, or call an elephant an unstriped zebra, but eventually it will become clear that the elephant is something else.
Right, because eventually our Voyager aircraft, rockets, which we sent out a few decades ago, may eventually hit some exoplanet and some star, but it could take millions of years. And
Right.
then, depending on how advanced the civilization is in that solar system, they may recognize it as a technological artifact that crashed, or they'll just call it a dark comet, right?
Right. And a few years after Oumuamua was discovered in 2017 by a telescope in Hawaii called Pan-STARRS, the same telescope discovered another object in September 2020, and they called it 2020 SO. It was a near-Earth object, and it seemed to be pushed away from the sun by reflecting sunlight. And it wasn't clear what it is until the astronomers interpolated back in time the trajectory of 2020 SO and realized that it was a rocket booster of a 1966 launch by NASA. And so here you have an example of a technological object that was initially cataloged as a near-Earth object, but in fact, we know that it's technological because we produced it, and it's pushed away from the sun in a way that has nothing to do with evaporation. It's just because it had thin walls and therefore a large surface area for its mass.
Right. So that could be like Oumuamua. That might be similar, right?
Yes, and the question in that case, the question is who sent Oumuamua and what does it mean? But
Right.
we unfortunately we can't get more data on Oumuamua. It's sort of like being sitting in a bar, seeing someone you like, and then that someone leaves the bar into the dark street through the front door, and then you can't get more data on that someone, but you hope to find family members to get more information. And so with the Rubin Observatory, we could, in principle, find the relatives of Oumuamua, the cousins of Oumuamua, and learn from them about the family.
Right. What's your take on Elon Musk's Starship, and you think he'll be successful in getting it to Mars in about 2 years? He thinks he's going to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful vision. I think it's in fact, I would even be more ambitious and say it's not the destination is not just Mars. Mars is a, the first demonstration that humanity can be, let's say, a multi-planet civilization. But the ultimate goal is to actually leave the solar system and become an interstellar species. And but as an intermediate step, I think going to Mars is a very important milestone. Now, there are some health risks. We might want to send robots first. And the reason is that the temperature on the surface of Mars changes by hundreds of degrees between day and night. And moreover, there are cosmic rays that are not being moderated by an atmosphere or magnetic field on Mars the way they are on Earth. And therefore, exposing the human body to these would mean a big health hazard because humans cannot survive for more than a few years unprotected. And of course, we can go down to caves that allow us to be protected. It will be a bit ironic because humanity started from prehistoric caves, and
Right. We're going
we
back.
might go back to Mars into caves. But these health risks should be, of course, dealt with before we send humans over there.
Right.
And there is actually a moon of Mars that we could potentially take advantage of in terms of bringing equipment that it would be easier to land on it and then leave it and it could serve as a bridge to Mars. And I wrote an essay about that recently. I think it's a very exciting possibility because it's pretty close to Mars, and it will be around for 50 million years. So at least for the near future, we can use it as a port.
And because it's smaller, there's less gravity to overcome in
Right.
taking off with rockets and landing and so on.
Exactly. So altogether, thinking big beyond Earth, I think, is the kind of vision that Elon is promoting, and I very much resonate with that. I think uh, us focusing on what happens on the surface of this rock that we were born on is very narrow-minded in a sense that first of all we invest most of our resources in conflicts just because we don't realize how much real estate there is out there. And secondly, once we open our mind to outer space, we would realize that as of now, we are all in the same boat. And, it's just like being on the boat at the Pacific Ocean where I was there. And, there was this team of researchers that were with me. And we really felt connected because we were all on the same boat. We had to help each other. There were no negative personalities over there. And it's only when you forget that you occupy the same boat that you get into conflicts. Because once you realize that we all depend on each other and we can help each other constructively to have a better future, then we would benefit from each other and not feel hostile to each other. And so the question is, where will this message come from? And I don't think it will come from from the song of John Lennon that imagine all the people living in peace. That is
Right.
very sort of naive. I think it will come from recognition that there is a lot of real estate in interstellar space, in also in the solar system, that we could all feel as if we are members of the same exciting frontier of exploring those.
Right. Now, if people are interested in helping you fund the Galileo project, which I think is very, very important, how can they do that now? Is there a website or somewhere they can go to help you fund that? I'm sure once the Netflix special comes out, you're going to get like tens of millions of dollars, but that's a year away. So how can people help you now?
Well, we established a couple of weeks ago a foundation, the Galileo Project Foundation, which is a 501c organization where there is no tax. And the link to the foundation is in an essay that I wrote when we launched it about a couple of weeks ago. And if you go to medium.com, that's where I post my essays. You search for Avi Loeb at medium.com, you will find the essay with the keywords, the Galileo Project Foundation in the title, and you can find the link over there. And
Right.
we obviously are very grateful to any donations that we receive.
And the Galileo project also has a site on the X platform, Musk's X platform. I'll include that in
Right.
when I post this. So if people want to donate some funds, they'll be able to do that.
Yeah.
Do you think possibly the material you got from IM1, those metallic spherules, might also be able to protect the Mars travelers from cosmic rays? Maybe it blocks radiation, cosmic rays, gamma rays, because that's a long trip to Mars. It's about 6 months.
Yeah, potentially we can learn a lot from materials that arrive to us from other stars. I mean, even if they're natural, those materials could have been processed very differently than solar system materials, and the chemical composition could be different. What was special about this meteor is that it had a material strength much larger than other meteors. For example, there was a meteor that exploded over Spain and Portugal in April 2024, and it did so at an altitude of 70 kilometers, where the air density is 1,000 times lower than the air density at the explosion site of the first interstellar meteor, IM1. And so that shows you that the material strength of IM1, that meteor, was actually 1,000 times bigger, and so that makes it quite unusual. And beyond that, if we ever find traces of technologies developed by other civilizations, we can learn from a smarter kid on our block, because they may have had science and technology for more than a century. And so that could be inspiring, because we could then attempt to reverse engineer what we learn from finding those. And it could give us a quantum leap in our technologies, because developing the same ourselves will take us a long time. And part of the process can be aided by artificial intelligence. For me, AI represents two frontiers. One is artificial intelligence, our technological kid that may outsmart us
Right.
in the near future. And within years, we will be faced with a completely new reality, where in the past, when we drove a car, it was not smarter than us. When we used tools, they were always at our disposal. We could manipulate them. But with AI, for the first time in history, we could have an entity that we develop that might be more capable than we are on some tasks. And I think that could create frustration. It could also pose a risk in terms of manipulating us. We have to be careful at what kind of authority to give it in the real world. And there are lots of policy issues in the coming few years that the White House, the US government, will have to decide on, and related to artificial intelligence. Now, AI could also mean alien intelligence, which again could be superhuman. And the question is, which will be found first? And will it be the artificial intelligence in the form of silicon chips that we are producing, or something that came from another star? And um, well, I'm not sure. It really depends how much effort we put in both endeavors. Of course, the first one has commercial benefits and will definitely come into play in society. But given all the reports about the UAP, I mean, the question is, do we have something else visiting us right now other than our own technologies?
It would be nice when you do your expedition number 2 on IM-1, if you go down there with this robotic arm and you find an anti-gravity rocket.
Yeah, I mean, I should say
That would
that
be nice.
even though it sounds that anti-gravity is a fancy word, I mean, there is a simple way to imagine something that is propelled uh, by well, it's by gravity, and uh, we are all familiar with positive masses. That the Earth has a positive mass, it attracts us, and that's why we stick to the surface of the Earth. And the Earth orbits the Sun because of the Sun's positive mass. But in electromagnetism, we have positive and negative charges that induce opposite forces on a charged particle. And so imagine if negative masses could exist. I mean, there is nothing in Einstein's theory of general relativity that excludes the possibility of negative masses. We just don't see them in reality. So if you had a negative mass, it would basically repel objects gravitationally rather than attract. So imagine having a negative mass next to a positive mass. For example, next to the Earth, you place a planet that has the mass of the Earth with a negative sign. What will happen? That planet would push the Earth because gravity is pushing the Earth away from a negative mass. But the Earth would attract the negative mass towards it. And so you would end up with a situation where both of them accelerate steadily at 1g, which will be like having a rocket at 1g with no fuel, no propulsion. It's just that the negative mass is pushing away the positive mass, and the positive mass is attracting the negative mass with it. And then the two are accelerating together at exactly the same speed. And this is an example of a situation where you can employ gravity for acceleration. In fact, 1g would feel very comfortable. It's just the acceleration we feel on the surface of Earth. But if you accelerate for 1 year at 1g, you can reach the speed of light. And if you accelerate for 25 years at 1g, then in principle, you can traverse the universe during a few decades of your life. So, all bets are off if there are negative masses. And one can also...
How is negative mass different than antimatter?
Oh, very different, because antimatter has positive mass. It's just uh, an anti-electron is a positron. It has the opposite charge to the electron, but it has still a positive mass, the same mass as the electrons. So there are no particles or objects, entities with negative mass known as of now. Antimatter is, of course, a risk. If you were to shake the hand of someone who is made of antimatter, then you could both annihilate. And I should also say that, I mean, the universe is obviously made of matter, not antimatter, because early on the universe was very dense if you go back in time, and all the antimatter was annihilated by matter, and there was a little bit, maybe 6 parts in 10 billion of matter excess relative to antimatter, and that's responsible for what we see around us today. So there was a little bit residue of matter, and that's why we exist. Almost everything annihilated into radiation, which is now seen as the cosmic microwave background. So that's why our universe does not include antimatter. But you can ask, okay, is there any other risk if an alien shows up, or if we meet alien life, even microbial? Is there any risk in touching it? And the answer is yes. Even if it's made of matter, it could be mirror life, meaning that the molecules, that we are made of, the DNA, the RNA, are all right-handed in terms of their orientation, and as a result, I mean, they could have been the other way around. It's just that the symmetry was broken. It's not clear what was the process that gave this chirality to life.
Right.
Um, but it could have been the other way around. And now, if we ever meet life that has the opposite chirality, it has the same structure of DNA, RNA, and so forth, but has the opposite chirality, then that would pose a health risk. There was actually a paper published in Science magazine just this week
Right.
alerting against us scientists producing mirror life because our body will not be able to protect itself.
Right. Our immune
Uh,
system would have no effect on bacteria that had the opposite
right.
chirality. Right.
Exactly. And we know that Mars lost its liquid water, its oceans, lakes, rivers, and so forth, when it lost its atmosphere about 2 billion years ago. There could have been life on it. And if it was similar to life on Earth, it just had the opposite chirality. We should be careful when we go to Mars. I mean, if there are any microbes left over, we should definitely check what chirality they have before touching them. So that's
Right.
another health risk that is not often discussed. Because
Right.
even though these experts were warning us against producing artificially mirror life on Earth, Mars is under no obligation to satisfy the wishes or the recommendations of this group of experts.
Right. I read that article. There are a few Nobel Prize winners who signed their name to that article, so they're
Right.
real nervous about that. One other thing besides that, that's keeping me up at night, in addition to the drones and the bird flu pandemic and antimatter and so on, is I recently read that the acceleration of the expansion of the universe is continuing to increase. How do you explain that?
Well, we know the universe is accelerating, and actually, the simplest explanation is that the vacuum itself has some energy per unit volume, has some mass density. This is called dark energy. We don't know the source of that. Einstein introduced it to his equations because he wanted to balance gravity of matter in the universe. He just philosophically, he was not happy with the idea that the universe started at some time, like the Big Bang. So he wanted to find a way of stabilizing the universe so that it existed forever. And one way to do that is to introduce the so-called cosmological constant, which is basically the mass density of the vacuum. And that has an effect of negative gravity, actually. It creates a repulsive force. And he just introduced it such that it balances the attractive force of matter. But then he realized that's an unstable situation. If you just perturb a little bit, if a butterfly shakes its wings, you end up with a slight enhancement in the matter density or deficit, and that would create regions that are not in balance, and they would either collapse or expand, and you would not get a stable situation. So later on, it was found that the universe is indeed expanding. And if you go back in time, there was a time called the Big Bang when the expansion started. We don't know what happened before the Big Bang. That would be my first question to an alien. If I could pose one question is, what was it? What started the Big Bang? Because if we knew that, we could potentially create a recipe for making a baby universe, just like having a recipe for a cake. But at any event, so we know the universe is expanding, but nevertheless, it so happens that there is accelerated expansion in the last half of cosmic history. And that's because Einstein was not completely wrong. There is actually a mass density to the vacuum that is creating this repulsive force that is pushing galaxies apart at an accelerated rate. And so the universe is exponentially expanding to a very good approximation. And if it continues to do so, we will be left in dark space surrounding us, and all the distant galaxies far away will exit from our event horizon. So if we have any friends, they would not be able to send us any text messages or Instagram messages or TikTok messages from other galaxies beyond a certain time in their future, because they would move away from us faster than light. And that is currently the standard model of cosmology. But the latest wrinkle is that there is a debate that, in fact, the acceleration rate is possibly changing slightly over time. We don't know that for sure. The claims are not, there are people arguing both ways. So it's not at all clear if that's indeed the case, but there are hints that perhaps the acceleration is not uniform. It's not the same
Right.
at
I
all
read
times.
it used to be 67 kilometers per second per 3.6 light years. Now they've increased that
No,
to,
3.6 million light years.
right, 3.6 million light years. Right. Sorry.
Yeah.
But now it's up to like 75 or so. So it
Well, so there are
seems like
different
somebody
groups.
has their
Yeah.
foot on the accelerator.
Well, there are different groups arguing both ways, and we don't know the final verdict as of yet. But on top of that, there is an independent measurement of the recent cosmic history, the last half of cosmic history, during which it looks as if there are hints that the vacuum energy density may not have been constant. Okay, so that's on top of the fact that the expansion rate that we measure now does not match perfectly. The deviation that people argue about is at the level of 5%. So if you start at very early times, 400,000 years after the Big Bang, when the universe became transparent and we can see the relic radiation, the cosmic microwave background, from that time, the signatures indicate today we should be expanding at some speed, but we measure the expansion rate to be a little bit larger than that, according to some people. But on top of that, from the last half of cosmic history, it seems like perhaps the vacuum energy density was not constant. And so there are still these wrinkles that have to be cleared up. Otherwise, the standard cosmological model holds together. I should say yesterday I was at dinner with a mathematician, and he was telling me, what about all these problems that are being raised about the first galaxies observed by the Webb telescope? And I told him, no, that's not really fundamental to the cosmological model. It may well be that we don't fully understand how the first stars formed, and they formed in ways that are different than present-day stars. In fact, that's even what theorists predicted, and I wrote 2 textbooks on the subject. And I told him that physics models are usually an approximation. We don't know all the details, and it's sort of like an art. It's like a painter that is using the brush to paint reality in a simplified manner. And if you were to take a photograph of reality, it will include much more detail. And but the whole point of doing physics is to capture the essence, the substance, very often the models that we build of the physical reality are incomplete, and we are missing something. So by getting more data, we learn. That's very different from mathematics, which is not really trying to So he was asking me about the difference with mathematics. In mathematics, we can think of everything that is possible, as long as it's logical. And reality is only one realization of one possibility. And there is a big difference between thinking about everything that is possible and figuring out what is the one thing that is being realized. And it's the same as the difference between hoping to find the best partner that you can imagine in life versus going on a date with a real person.
Good analogy. I came up with, I think, a plausible explanation for why the acceleration is increasing. What if there are other big bangs and other universes surrounding us? And if several big bangs occur around our universe, that would increase the amount of gravity surrounding our universe. And with each big bang, that would accelerate the expansion of our universe. Now, I'm just an ophthalmologist, so you can make fun of that theory, but what do you think?
I mean, so it's quite, in principle, it's possible that once you go beyond the horizon, the cosmic horizon that we can see, which is the distance that light traveled since the Big Bang. I mean, that's the farthest we can see in principle, because nothing travels faster than light, according to what we know. So it's possible that once you go beyond that distance that we've never observed, there is a cliff, or there is something like you're suggesting, another Big Bang with different properties. We have a constraint on that because if there was a cliff or something really different out to a distance that is less than 4,000 times the cosmic horizon that we are probing, we would see the imprint of that on the cosmic microwave background. And so from observations of the cosmic microwave background, we see that it's uniform to 1 part in 100,000. And that allows us to set very tight limits on what lies beyond the cosmic horizon. So we at least know that the conditions that we see within our cosmic horizon continue for at least 4,000 times farther. And that means that, let's say we see 1 trillion galaxies within the cosmic horizon. It means that, in fact, there should be 4,000 cubed times more, about 64 billion galaxies that are beyond the horizon that we can't see, 64 billion times more than the trillion galaxies that we do see. But of course, we don't know what lies beyond that distance. It would have a small effect on our universe. And in fact, some physicists talk about the multiverse, where they speculate that conditions are very different when you go far away from our region. And in fact, there are some mainstream physicists who argue that anything that could happen will happen an infinite number of times in the multiverse. And I find that irresponsible, because it means that if you are a student and you get a D in the exam, you shouldn't be distressed because there are an infinite number of copies of you getting an A in the same exam.
So
Right?
so
Because
the average
anything,
is a B.
yeah, so who cares if in the reality that you are experiencing here and now, you are failing. So I don't like that because it basically eliminates a sense of responsibility from your life. If you think that anything that can happen will happen an infinite number of times, and whatever, moreover, it also cannot be easily tested because we cannot
Right.
visit those places. So we have no way of telling. And, if, let's put it this way, if such a physicist would have tried to sell me their used car, I would not buy it.
All right. And I'm going to just stick to ophthalmology, I think.
Another thing I should say that, there are some physicists who, for a number of decades, were suggesting that they are working on a theory that will unify quantum mechanics and gravity. But when you ask them, can you tell me what happened before the Big Bang? Because Einstein's theory of gravity breaks down at the Big Bang. There is a singularity. And the reason it breaks down is because it doesn't incorporate quantum mechanics. So you ask them, okay, well, you are working on such a theory. Can you tell me what happened? And they say, no, it's too complicated. And then you ask them, okay, so what happens at the center of a black hole? And they answer the same. They say it's too complicated. And so I make the analogy with a person who claims that, they are a plumber and they come to your home and you say, can you fix the toilet? And they say, no, it's too complicated. Can you fix the faucet? It's too complicated. But they can still say, well, in the metaverse, we are exceptional plumbers. You just need to put goggles on your head. So that's like saying in extra dimensions, we can actually solve some mathematical problems. And I would say, in answer to that, I would say, thank you very much. And I will not hire that plumber.
Right, right. Well, maybe AI will come up with some answers in the next few years. We'll see what happens.
Well, I really hope that humans will have an important role because of their creative abilities, even in the age of AI. And I'm not really threatened by that. I enjoy working with intelligent people. And, if my daughters do better than I do, I'm actually quite happy about that.
Right.
And so if AI ends up performing better than humans on some tasks, I would welcome that. It's not a threat to my ego. I think we can employ it in ways that will relieve us from boring duties that we currently do. Just think about the duties of administrators. Like suppose all of that would be done with AI. I have no issue with that, and then those administrators can do something more creative.
Right. Well, Musk is working on that too. He's making those robots with AI. So we'll see what happens in the next few years. It looks pretty promising.
Yes, I think he has several frontiers that he is pioneering, and I highly respect his vision. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty awesome. Well, I want to thank you again for taking the time to help us with the drone issue. I'm going to sleep more comfortably tonight, knowing that you don't think it's actually aliens. So, thanks very much for taking the time, and we really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I should say that with respect to the drones, I got an email that said, "Oh, you're saying that they are human-made, those over New Jersey, and now you sound like a boring scientist." And I said, "Well, I'm not in the entertainment business. I'm not supposed to entertain you. I'm just telling you what I think."
Right. That sums it up well. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me.